What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy faces off against a morning show host who thinks he can push around anyone? Well, you're about to find out because Clint Eastwood just delivered one of the most brutal verbal takedowns in television history, and it happened live on Good Morning America. This confrontation was so intense that producers are still trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment, because this story will leave you speechless. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studio in Times Square. Clint Eastwood had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest directorial project, a move that surprised many since the 94-year-old icon rarely does morning television. The studio buzzed with excitement as crew members prepared for what they assumed would be a routine interview with one of cinema's greatest legends. MichaelStrahan strutted into the studio that morning with his usual swagger, fresh off what he considered another successful week of hosting. He had been riding high on recent ratings, and his confidence was at an all-time peak. As he reviewed his notes backstage, Strahan made it clear to his producers that he wanted this interview to be memorable. "I want to dig deep with this guy," Strahan told his team while adjusting his tie. "Everyone always treats these old Hollywood types with kid gloves. I'm going to ask the real questions that people want to hear." His producer Sarah looked concerned. "Michael, remember this is Clint Eastwood we're talking about. He's not exactly known for being chatty or patient with aggressive questioning." Strahan waved her off dismissively. "Please, Sarah. I've interviewed presidents, athletes, and A-list celebrities. I think I can handle one old cowboy actor. Besides, our audience loves it when I bring some edge to these interviews." Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood sat quietly in his dressing room, reviewing the talking points his publicist had prepared. At his age, he had seen every type of interviewer imaginable, from respectful journalists to ambitious young hosts trying to make their mark. He could usually sense within the first few minutes what kind of interview it would be. His longtime assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Eastwood, they're ready for you in 5 minutes." "Thank you," Clint replied in his trademark gravelly voice. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the studio with the same measured pace that had defined his screen presence for decades. As the cameras went live, Robin Roberts delivered the introduction from the anchor desk. "Coming up next, we have a very special guest joining Michael this morning. The legendary Clint Eastwood is here to talk about his new film and his incredible career spanning over 6 decades in Hollywood." The camera cut to MichaelStrahan, who flashed his signature smile as he sat across from the iconic director. "Good morning, everyone. I'm here with the one and only Clint Eastwood." "Clint, thanks for joining us this morning." Eastwood nodded slightly. "Good morning, Michael. Now, before we talk about your new project, I have to ask about something that's been on everyone's mind lately." Strahan began, leaning forward with what he clearly thought was journalistic intensity. "There's been a lot of talk about whether older directors like yourself are still relevant in today's Hollywood. How do you respond to critics who say your time has passed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eastwood's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well would have recognized the subtle shift in his posture. The studio audience, which had been buzzing with excitement moments before, fell silent. "Critics, huh?" Eastwood replied slowly, his voice carrying that familiar edge that had made him famous in westerns and cop dramas. "Well, Michael, I've been hearing from critics for over 60 years. Most of them are sitting in offices somewhere, never having made a film in their lives." Strahan, missing the warning signs entirely, pressed forward. "But surely you have to admit that the industry has changed dramatically. Young audiences today want different stories, different perspectives. Don't you think it might be time for your generation to step aside and let fresh voices take over?" The camera captured Eastwood's reaction perfectly, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Strahan with the same intensity that had intimidated outlaws in countless westerns. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. "Step aside?" Eastwood repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Son, I was making movies when you were still learning how to tie your shoes. I've directed and produced films that have won Academy Awards, changed the industry, and influenced generations of filmmakers. What exactly have you accomplished in your life that gives you the authority to suggest when I should step aside?" The question hit Strahan like a punch to the gut, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Instead of recognizing that he was treading on dangerous ground, he doubled down on his aggressive approach. "Well, I've built a successful career in television. I was a professional athlete, and I connect with audiences across America every single day. Strahan replied, his voice rising slightly. I think that gives me the right to ask tough questions that viewers want answered. Eastwood's response was swift and devastating. A career in television, he said, emphasizing each word with surgical precision. You mean reading from a teleprompter and asking celebrities about their personal lives? And as for being a professional athlete, that ended years ago, didn't it? You're sitting here trying to build your reputation by tearing down mine, and frankly, son, that's the mark of someone who doesn't have much of a reputation to begin with. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath as they captured what was quickly becoming one of the most uncomfortable moments in morning television history. Strahan's face flushed red as he realized that his attempt to create a memorable interview was backfiring spectacularly. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife, but MichaelStrahan was too deep in his own ego to recognize the danger he was in. Instead of backing down from Eastwood's devastating comeback, he made the fatal mistake of trying to recover his authority on live television. Look, Clint, I'm just doing my job here, Strahan said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. The audience wants to know these things. I'm not trying to attack you personally, but let's be honest about the reality of Hollywood today. Eastwood's eyes narrowed to slits. Your job? He repeated, his voice dropping to that menacing whisper that had terrified movie villains for decades. Your job is supposed to be interviewing me about my new film. Instead, you're sitting there like some wannabe Mike Wallace trying to create controversy where none exists. The comparison to the legendary hard-hitting journalist clearly stung Strahan, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But rather than take the hint, he decided to escalate further, apparently believing he could somehow win this verbal duel with one of Hollywood's most formidable figures. I think I'm being perfectly reasonable, Strahan protested, his voice getting more defensive by the second. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked. Hollywood has a diversity problem, an age problem, and frankly, a relevance problem when it comes to older white directors. The moment those words left Strahan's mouth, you could practically see the temperature in the studio drop 10 degrees. Eastwood sat back in his chair, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet fury that made grown men reconsider their life choices. There it is, Eastwood said slowly, nodding his head as if everything had suddenly become clear. You want to make this about race and age because you don't have the intelligence or the preparation to have an actual conversation about filmmaking. You're sitting there trying to bait me into saying something controversial so you can have your little viral moment. Strahan's composure was cracking, and his voice became sharper and more aggressive. That's not what I'm doing at all. I'm addressing real issues in the industry. These are legitimate concerns that people have. Legitimate concerns? Eastwood's voice rose slightly, the first time he had shown any real emotion. Son, I've been making films since before you were born. I've worked with actors of every race, gender, and background. I've told stories that matter, stories that have stood the test of time. What stories have you told, Michael? What have you contributed to the world besides reading other people's words off a screen? The personal nature of the attack clearly rattled Strahan, who was now visibly sweating under the studio lights. His media training was failing him completely as he found himself in a verbal boxing match with someone far more experienced and infinitely more clever. I've contributed plenty, Strahan shot back, his professional demeanor finally cracking. I've entertained millions of people, I've inspired young athletes, and I've built multiple successful careers. I don't need to justify myself to you or anyone else. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, his words cut through the air like a blade. Multiple careers, huh? Let me tell you something about careers, kid. A real career is built on excellence, consistency, and respect from your peers. It's not built on jumping from one thing to another hoping something sticks. Football ended for you because you got old and slow. Now you're in television, and from what I can see, you're not particularly good at that either. The brutality of the assessment left Strahan speechless for several seconds. The camera captured every micro-expression as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't make him look even worse. The studio audience was completely silent, witnessing what was quickly becoming a masterclass in how to dismantle someone's ego on live television. That's completely unfair, Strahan finally managed, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You don't know anything about my work or my accomplishments. I know enough, Eastwood replied with devastating calm. I know that you invited me here supposedly to talk about my film, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to tear me down to build yourself up. That tells me everything I need to know about your character and your professionalism. Backstage, producers were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the interview. Sarah was speaking rapidly into her headset, trying to get direction from the network executives who were watching the disaster unfold in real time. The social media team was already fielding messages from viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Strahan, realizing that he was losing control completely, made one last desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. You know what, Clint? Maybe the problem isn't just about age or relevance. Maybe it's about attitude. You come in here with this arrogant, superior attitude, like you're above having to answer real questions. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Eastwood's expression didn't change, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the entire studio. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the microphones had to strain to pick it up, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. Arrogant? Eastwood repeated, shaking his head slowly. Son, arrogance is sitting across from a guest and trying to humiliate them for your own entertainment. Arrogance is thinking that being a television host gives you the right to judge someone's entire life's work. Arrogance is what you've been displaying for the last 10 minutes. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the knockout punch. But what's really pathetic is that you're not even good at being arrogant. You're like a child playing dress-up, trying to act tough when you don't have the intelligence, the experience, or the class to pull it off. Strahan's face went through a series of emotions, anger, embarrassment, and finally something approaching panic as he realized that he had completely lost control of the interview. His attempt to create a memorable television moment had backfired in the most spectacular way possible, and there was no graceful way to recover. The disaster continued to unfold as Strahan desperately searched for a way to salvage what was left of his dignity. His media training had prepared him for difficult guests, but nothing could have prepared him for the systematic destruction of his credibility that was happening in real time. With sweat visible on his forehead and his voice cracking slightly, he made one final attempt to turn the tables. Look, I think we're getting off track here, Strahan said, trying to force his trademark smile back onto his face. Maybe we should just agree to disagree and talk about your new movie. Eastwood's response was immediate and merciless. Oh no, Michael. You don't get to do that. You started this little game, and now you want to quit when you're losing. That's not how it works in the real world. The contempt in Eastwood's voice was palpable as he continued. You see, this is exactly what's wrong with people like you. You think you can say whatever you want, attack whoever you want, and then just smile and move on when it doesn't go your way. But actions have consequences, son, and words have meaning. Strahan's desperation was becoming more obvious by the second. I was just doing my job, asking tough questions. That's what journalists do. Journalists? Eastwood's laugh was cold and humorless. Is that what you think you are? Let me explain something to you about journalism, kid. Real journalists do research. They prepare thoughtful questions. They show respect for their subjects while still pursuing the truth. What you did today was amateur-hour character assassination disguised as an interview. The studio crew was now watching in fascination and horror as one of the most respected figures in entertainment history completely eviscerated their host. Camera operators zoomed in to capture every nuance of the exchange, knowing they were witnessing television history, albeit for all the wrong reasons. You came in here with a agenda, Eastwood continued, his voice gaining strength and authority with each word. You wanted to make yourself look important by trying to make me look irrelevant. But here's what you failed to understand, Michael. Relevance isn't determined by age or by the opinion of some television host who peaked playing a game with a ball. Strahan's face was now flushed red with embarrassment and anger. That's not fair. I've worked hard to build my career in television. Hard work? Eastwood's eyebrows raised in mock surprise. Reading cue cards and asking celebrities about their dating lives is hard work? Son, hard work is spending 18 hours a day on a film set trying to tell a story that matters. Hard work is learning your craft over decades, not months. Hard work is earning the respect of your peers through excellence, not through gimmicks and controversy. The veteran director leaned back in his chair, completely comfortable despite the chaos he was creating. You want to know what real journalism looks like? It's asking about the creative process. It's understanding the craft. It's showing curiosity about how someone has sustained excellence over 6 decades. But instead, you came in here with some half-baked agenda about age and relevance, because that's the only level you're capable of operating on. Strahan was now completely out of his depth, struggling to form coherent responses. I think you're being unfair to my preparation and my intentions. Your intentions? Eastwood's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. Your intentions were crystal clear from the first question. You wanted to create a moment, get some headlines, maybe go viral on social media. You thought you could use me as a stepping stone to boost your own profile. The problem is, you picked the wrong target. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the studio audience seemed afraid to breathe as they watched this legendary figure systematically destroy someone on live television. Eastwood wasn't finished. Let me give you some free advice, Michael, since it's clear nobody else has had the courage to tell you the truth. Respect is earned, not demanded. Class can't be taught, but it can be learned if you're humble enough to listen. And most importantly, if you're going to come at someone, you better make sure you're equipped for the fight. Strahan made one last desperate attempt to regain control. I think our viewers would appreciate it if we could just move forward professionally. Eastwood's final response was delivered with the same quiet intensity that had made him a legend. Professionally? There's nothing professional about what you did here today. You ambushed a guest, showed complete disrespect for someone who's been in this business longer than you've been alive, and then tried to hide behind your job description when it backfired. He stood up slowly, his presence somehow making him seem even taller than his actual height. Here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact and my reputation unharmed. You, on the other hand, are going to have to explain to your bosses, your viewers, and yourself why you thought it was a good idea to pick a fight you couldn't win. The camera captured every second as Eastwood removed his microphone with deliberate calm. Good luck with your career, Michael. Based on what I've seen today, you're going to need it. With that devastating final line, Clint Eastwood walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a panicked production crew, and one thoroughly humiliated television host. Strahan sat frozen in his chair, completely speechless, as the cameras continued to roll and captured what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in television history. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before someone finally cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In less than 15 minutes, MichaelStrahan had gone from confident television host to viral intentions. Your intentions? Eastwood's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. Your intentions were crystal clear from the first question. You wanted to create a moment, get some headlines, maybe go viral on social media. You thought you could use me as a stepping stone to boost your own profile. The problem is, you picked the wrong target. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the studio audience seemed afraid to breathe as they watched this legendary figure systematically destroy someone on live television. Eastwood wasn't finished. Let me give you some free advice, Michael, since it's clear nobody else has had the courage to tell you the truth. Respect is earned, not demanded. Class can't be taught, but it can be learned if you're humble enough to listen. And most importantly, if you're going to come at someone, you better make sure you're equipped for the fight. Strahan made one last desperate attempt to regain control. I think our viewers would appreciate it if we could just move forward professionally. Eastwood's final response was delivered with the same quiet intensity that had made him a legend. Professionally? There's nothing professional about what you did here today. You ambushed a guest, showed complete disrespect for someone who's been in this business longer than you've been alive, and then tried to hide behind your job description when it backfired. He stood up slowly, his presence somehow making him seem even taller than his actual height. Here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact and my reputation unharmed. You, on the other hand, are going to have to explain to your bosses, your viewers, and yourself why you thought it was a good idea to pick a fight you couldn't win. The camera captured every second as Eastwood removed his microphone with deliberate calm. Good luck with your career, Michael. Based on what I've seen today, you're going to need it. With that devastating final line, Clint Eastwood walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a panicked production crew, and one thoroughly humiliated television host. Strahan sat frozen in his chair, completely speechless, as the cameras continued to roll and captured what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before someone finally cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In less than 15 minutes, MichaelStrahan had gone from confident television host to viral